LaFaye, thanks for joining us today. By way of intro, my name is Courtney Pallotta. I lead the marketing team at EverDriven, and we are here today with LaFaye Platter. And LaFaye has a extensive career in education and leadership and is an executive leadership coach focused on working with leaders and their teams. We really appreciate you joining us today. How are you doing, LaFaye?
I'm great, and it's great to be here and to have this opportunity to talk about this topic. Thanks.
Awesome. One of the best pieces of advice I got in my career years ago is that if we think our careers are linear, we are going to be greatly disappointed.
So true.
And I think if we go into our first question, and once you embrace that, you embrace the beauty of what is not a linear journey, but one that is, an equally fantastic journey, not always how we think it's going to go. And maybe to that end, I would love to know what sparked your shift from business and real estate to education and leadership?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and it's been a good one. So I'll just start by saying I majored in business administration right out of high school because I wanted to work for a big corporation, make lots of money and get rich, and that didn't happen. I did have the opportunity, however, to work for some great institutions, mostly financial institutions because of the business background. I worked in accounting, I worked for trust companies, did commercial real estate, all those things. And I realized that I am not a numbers person. I'm a words person. I like interacting with people. I like interacting with young people. I like helping people solve problems that are complex in the industry. So when I had an opportunity, I thought I would just try out education. When I got into education, I recognized that I loved it, but I saw the opportunity in education to help people with some of the systems and structures that I had learned in business, that those could be transferred over to the educational side of the house. So I taught for some years, which gave me the background that I needed for that, and then moved up to work in human resources and got involved in budget and finance and was able to just bring all those things together. So I would say just through a series of happenstance events, I ended up retiring from education, and I think that all of those different experiences, which are very nonlinear, have helped me to see the work that's being done in transportation departments, and especially with this Senate Bill 88, how it takes just a conglomeration of a lot of different departments and organizations to do this effectively and efficiently.
A superpower for you is navigating complexity across organizations, no matter their type. Can you talk a little bit more about what navigating complexity has looked like when it comes to education and even in that realm, transportation?
Yes, I believe that any good leader knows how to make the complex issues simple. Because in order for people to follow any leader, they have to speak in a language that's understandable and comprehensible. And in education, we tend to use a lot of acronyms. It is a very complex system that is heavily siloed, more so than any organization that I've ever worked with. And the difficult thing about education is that a lot of times there is not an incentive for people to work across silos. That leads to the complexity of getting any issues resolved or leading any kind of change, because rarely is there anything that needs to happen, especially like the implementation of Senate Bill 88. It's going to require people to work across silos. So I would say what makes education complex are a couple of things. People needing the time to truly understand what the change initiative is, understanding why it's necessary, communicating that to all the stakeholders, especially everybody who touches that system and has to be a part of implementing that change, and then having people have an incentive to work across silos to bring it about. So, as you know, public education is a behemoth, and getting change done in that large, heavily siloed organization is like trying to turn the Titanic. But there are some things that we can do when we know what components we need to bring about institutional change. There are some things that we can do to make it less complex.
Yes, the Titanic reference is certainly a good one. It's to change is even despite the best laid intentions, change is always hard. Well,
Right.
You talked a little bit about Senate Bill 88, and recently, those that may be listening, we were part of a webcast where we talked in detail about SB 88 and its requirements and answered a lot of questions from different types of educators in California. Maybe let's back up a little bit and say, Why is SB 88 more than just a compliance requirement?
Well, it's more than just a compliance requirement because it involves the safety of students, in my opinion. As I learned about it and read it, it's about keeping students safe, and it's about making sure that those in charge of making sure that in a district you are mitigating against lawsuits, you're mitigating against complaints, and you're keeping students safe. It's about all of those things. That's more than just a compliance issue. It's about taking care of your own and taking care of the people and the students who are in your charge and in your care.
In your work with school systems, what are some of the big shifts that you've seen in student transportation over the past few years that got us here?
Oh my gosh. Well, lawsuits. You can just, people don't open the paper anymore. You can open the internet and just read about the cases where people have done unthinkable things to students because there were not protections there, or people have been negligent. School districts often hire people out of necessity, not out of intending any harm, who don't necessarily have the requirements, know the safety requirements, the background checks aren't in place, and we put our most vulnerable people, our most vulnerable humans, our students, in their care. So number one, cautionary tales is the first reason that we know that this is a very important thing. You know, the other part of it is that our special education population and students who are placed in agencies outside of the school district, that population has increased greatly over the last several years. Along with that, our McKinney-Vento students, our homeless and foster population, has grown exponentially as well. Most often, those students have to be transported in non-traditional ways. So all of these things have increased the need for something like Senate Bill 88, and for districts to implement it in an appropriate way to keep all of those very vulnerable students safe.
I think what's fantastic is that you see, as you describe, that many forward-looking districts have found powerful ways of making sure that every student, whether they're experiencing housing instability or they have special requirements from a transport perspective, can have their needs met, is fantastic. How does that apply in your mind to SB 88 implementation? Where is there an opportunity there?
There's definitely an opportunity in SB 88 to apply, I'll say, any research-based change model. The Nostra model simply is one of them. One of the issues that I see when I go in and work with leaders in their teams is that they don't recognize the impact that different requirements they put on the people who are doing the work have on those people. So they don't share a compelling vision. Having a compelling vision, letting people know why something is important, is the first step in the Nostra model. When people don't understand why they're being asked to make changes in their policies, processes, and procedures, they tend to just really not buy in. They tend to be very lackadaisical about it. They don't cross the aisle and work across silos. They're just not invested in the change. Also in the Nostra model, they talk about giving people the skills. So we're all heavily invested in SB 88. We've studied it. We know what it is. But I can guarantee you that in most school districts, oftentimes your department, your transportation department head will know about it, but other people who have to be involved in it will not know enough about it to know what they need to do in response to that. So the skill set that they need is education about what it says, and then people, leaders, can engage around a conversation about this is what it says. What does that mean for me and my department? What training do I need? And what does everybody on my team need to know and be able to do to bring this about? One of the final steps is having a clear-cut action plan that's clearly articulated well, simply, and often, because people are busy. This is not going to be most people's day-to-day work. For the transportation director, sure, but everybody else has other work to do. So communicating with them in a positive way, letting them work out an action plan about what they're going to do first. What's the first step? How do we know that we know? How do we hold people accountable? And all of those things is important to do. So the Nostra model, like I said, is just one change model that I highly recommend, but there are others. But anybody who is interested in bringing about any small scale or large scale change needs to work through some type of change model. Otherwise, it's like shots in the dark. And what happens is people get frustrated because everybody's not on the same page that they are. are and why is this happening, and fingers start getting pointed. And quite often, what gets characterized as people problems are actually systems problems. So let's fix the system first, and 99.9% of the people, when they know what to do it, how to engage with the work, are going to want to do it, and they're going to do it.
Absolutely. It's very helpful for people to understand how they can start to think about solving for this pragmatically. If you, in that same realm, what about a point person? Why is it important to have a clear point person and an action plan?
If everybody's in charge and everybody's responsible for their own little section of it, then nobody's in charge. And what you get is a lot of finger pointing when people don't do the right things. So with any initiative, there has to be someone who is ultimately responsible for knowing that it's done correctly, for knowing that people are doing what they need to do, and being able to go in, have the authority, or be close to someone who has the authority to say, you have to do it this way, you have to do this. Because when there's not one person in charge, like I said, people tend to not accept responsibility for it. And it's just easy to blame everybody. That's a systems issue. It is as predictable as, the sun's going to come up in the morning. There will be problems if there is not a point person, but when there is a point person and that person is a driver, not a follower, someone who has influence, someone knows how to engage people and support people in the right way possible, then almost anything is possible.
That's great. So what do you think about if, let's say, a school system, they implement a change management policy like this, and in doing so, they believe they have all their boxes checked, but what happens in any given situation? All of a sudden, you don't know how people are going to respond. So you've got people on your staff being like, you told me to do this, I still don't get it. How can school systems better support staff as they, well-intentioned, really aim to adopt new transportation policies, but also, it's a time of change?
I've heard leaders say, and I'm ashamed to say that I have said this as well in my youth, I have an open door policy. If people don't understand, they can just come ask me. Well, people are not going to walk through that open door because, as I said before, this is not their main thing. They're doing a million other things, and it's not going to be a priority to them unless there is someone who is making it a priority, and there is a checklist, so to speak, and accountability and someone checking. So what I've been saying lately is that you have to take the open door to them. First off, the superintendent, the assistant sup of human resources, or whoever has the most authority has to give whoever is the point person the power to go out and observe. You have to know that you know. You have to go out and witness. You have to say to people, show me how you know that this vendor has the qualifications. This person who is working for the organization, show me that you know that their car has met, or their van has met all of the requirements. Show me so that I know. You have to go out. But at the same time, you have to be out there adding support to support you. Tell me about this. What's working with this change? What's not working? And only by having those face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball meetings with people, looking people in the eye, building rapport, letting them metaphorically touch and feel your energy, will you actually know that it's working. And most people, once you provide that kind of support, number one, they're going to start telling you, we said we were going to do this, but here's the glitch with that. You can go back and make a quick change to that. Also, you will know who the people are who absolutely don't have the skill to do the job. If they don't have the skill, 9 times out of 10, you can train them up to do that. But then there's a very, very small percentage of people who don't have the will to institute the change. And when you find those few people, that's why you need authority from above to say, we're going to have to make a personnel change here in whatever way is possible. But that's usually very, very few people. It starts with communication from someone in a position of authority, giving a point person authority, communicating well, often and clearly about what it means, letting people work it out within their systems, checking on it, and knowing that When all those things are in place, it works well. If not, there could be problems.
Yes, it is really interesting perspective when you talk about bringing the open door to the team, which is in order for you to really understand, are we holding ourselves accountable? Where are we falling short? Right. Where do the challenges lie? It's as soon as the detail is where things always get lost.
Yes.
whatever the phrase, the devil's in the details.
Yes.
And in hearing you say this, you can see how not only is a point person so essential, it's like, what's the plan? Here's the point person. And then making sure both the documentation and the ongoing accountability and
Right.
dialogue is really, really happening to make sure that everybody's heading towards the same direction, which I think ultimately also reduces risk.
It absolutely reduces risk. Yeah, definitely mitigates for risk. So that's just kind of a return on investment that you get from that. And I wanted to emphasize a little bit more about that communication piece. First off, whoever that point person is has to have quite a high degree of emotional intelligence. They have to know what energy they bring to the room and to the people they meet with on a daily basis, because people will follow people who make them feel good about themselves. And if you want people to follow you and to follow this change initiative that you're talking about, they have to like you. They have to attach to you. They have to feel protected and supported by you. In order for the point person or the leader to bring that about, they have to be able to understand, be self-aware and others aware, because each person who's responsible for bringing about this change will have a different level of need, will need to be approached in a little bit different way. And if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Email is Not Leadership. You do not build connection. You do not bring about substantive, long-lasting change by sending out emails. There is a time and a place for email, and we can talk about that at another time. But doing this work, especially getting it started, is not the place for email only. The biggest part of this are those face-to-face conversations and meetings. Now you can devolve to email down the road when things are working well, when you know they're working well. But that face-to-face is the most important part.
The value of that face-to-face human interaction. I mean, we were 1 week off of having had our team summit here in Denver. And one of the biggest learning of all the things that we enabled on, what was the most important thing? That we figured out, how can I do a better job working with you as a human and you as a human? And how do I build a trusted relationship where we deeply understand what is motivating and required of each individual so that we can make better progress? And there's no like Zoom call to teach that thing. You just kind of have to earn the trust and listen. And is no different here in terms of trying to drive change that's powerful. So my next question to you is, as I'm sure if we were taking live Q&A, people would ask, can you share an example of a district that has taken a strong proactive approach to transportation change?
I can. Placentia Yorba Linda in California. Richard Jimenez is the director of transportation. He was on the webinar. He is an expert at it. They've done it. They have their systems in place. He's an expert. I do some work in Moreno Valley Unified School District here in California. Jim Burleson is the director of transportation there. So Carlos Chicas from San Juan Capistrano, I would say also is another excellent implementer of this Senate bill.
Carlos and Richard, we've spoken with as part of this process and talk about leaders who are really embracing the change, even as complex as it is, and also help us at EverDriven think through how we articulate what compliance looks like from our side based on what their needs look like and what the corresponding questions are. Because like any new piece of legislation, one thing is always going to be true. It is subject to interpretation and results in as many questions as there are words in the bill that need to be figured out. Let's go to, what advice might you offer an HR and a procurement team who may not typically be involved in transportation for students, but are for the reasons that you've described relative to SB 88? What advice would you offer?
Well, when I was in human resources, my mindset was always plan from the lawsuit and then mitigate and work backwards from there, because there will be. There will be claims, there will be issues and all of that. However, people who are in procurement and people who are in human resources especially, if there is a claim, if there is a lawsuit, you never want to be found negligent. You never want to be found responsible. You want to make sure that you have done everything that the law requires. Because the worst feeling in the world is to be before a judge or to be before a family and something has occurred and to recognize that you missed something. So my advice to procurement and human resources departments is thing one, know that this is important. Get with your director of transportation. Bring him or her into your very next cabinet meeting and start having that conversation about what this change entails, because in cabinet is where all the leaders of all the departments will be, and once they start understanding the scope of the practices, policies, and procedures that are required to bring about this change, they will be able to work with their departments to do it. So in a nutshell, to restate, bring this to cabinet, invite the director of transportation, know what the bill says, and start working out how it's going to be instituted in your district, and start writing down the questions that you don't have answers to, and reach out to to different people to get those answers. But start.
No time like the present. At this point, I would call it still proactive, but being able to be proactive when you know we are in that moment before school starts again, and deadlines are deadlines, being able to stay ahead of that's fantastic, and is a very prescriptive way for an HR or a procurement team to find their way into a process like this. Now, let's look ahead a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about how something like the E4 model, it might be useful for outlining expectations, execution, evaluation, exit strategy, and what that actually means for districts who may want to apply that to transport planning.
So coming from business is largely linear. It's much more linear than public education. When I came into public education and recognized just how siloed it is, I started thinking about, from my perspective, my field was always human resources, and human resources is about people. And I saw that quite often you had people who wanted to do the right thing, but because of the siloed nature of public education, quite often there was just a lot of frustration in the system. So I just sat down and started thinking about everything that I had learned through personal experience, frustrations that I had had as a site administrator and then a district administrator. And I combined that with just several of the leadership change models that I had studied in school. And I just recognized or thought, there are 4 things that have to be present if anything is to happen, from losing 10 pounds, which I'm working on, to bringing about a large-scale change, in a school. First off, you do have to set expectations. You have to have a vision. People have to know where they're headed. What is the goal? What is the end result here? People need to know that. Then you have to execute. And it sounds simple to say, of course you have to execute. But for a lot of people, I have sat in a lot of meetings where we walk out of there and nobody knows what the first step is. You talk it to death, and then you have analysis paralysis. And because we're habitually set to respond the same way to things over time. And there's a reason for that. We need to have habits because it preserves energy for the other things. But there are a lot of people who are so afraid to do something different that they don't do the change needed to bring about a difference in the organization. So consequently, when I talk about how hard it is to turn the Titanic, that's because it's very difficult to get people to execute or do something in a different way than they've always done it. Okay, so that's that. So the next thing is you have to evaluate. You have to know that what you're doing is working. If not, you need to be able to pivot and make changes quickly. So one of the things about keeping people motivated is that the quicker they get feedback in a supportive, proactive way, the quicker they will change. The longer you let people go down a road that is not effective or efficient, the more they're going to be set in that way, and the more they're going to be invested in doing it that way. So when I talk about having a point person, and that person has to be connected to the people doing the work and having conversations, when we talk about evaluation, of course there will be numbers, there'll be forms, there'll be checklists, but going out saying, how's this working? How did this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this. So when you look at the game of basketball, if I shoot a free throw, I'm going to know immediately if I made that free throw or not. And I'm going to be able to self-correct immediately, which increases the chances of me doing it correctly in a shorter period of time. So if you attach that to leadership or change, the more closely we can give feedback to the action, the more likely we are to get people to execute the needed change in the right way, as opposed to letting it go on forever. And then finally, I have what's called the final E is an exit strategy, or sometimes I call it, continuous improvement cycle or whatever. But at some point you have to say, okay, we've got this, we're going to go on and we're going to make something else the main thing. And only that organization, that point person and the leaders know when, all right, this is dialed in, we're going to do a refresher every year, we have our systems in place, this is no longer the main thing right now, but it's still important, or we still need to be working on this and keep it at the forefront. In public education, we are excellent at starting things. This was one thing I discovered, but then we don't tell people when we're moving on to something different or when things have changed. So people in their minds, they're holding all of this space for everything that they think might be important. And the leader's role is to say, this is the main thing right now. This is what we're focusing on right now. Take all these other things off your plate for this moment.
I mean, that's very helpful and also very prescriptive, right? Which is sometimes just getting alignment is taking that little bit of extra time to say, have we documented expectations? What are the executional elements? We are constantly tracking projects for the same reason, which is you often leave a meeting and you're going, well, I don't know, who's going to start this? And very, very helpful to say, like, get those details right and you'll see the progression flow as envisioned, but often doesn't happen because of these, it's like a little bit lost in the connective tissue. But
if I could add on to that a little bit, I've recently started working with teams with a meeting structure that mitigates for that a bit. And just very quickly, what it involves is everybody who is on the team, everybody in cabinet, everybody who's going to touch the work, they are sitting so that they're facing each other. And that's important because the energy needs to flow into the center. And they're talking about the change, the project, the whatever. And the notion is everybody has to envision that we are all individually and collectively responsible for results. So whenever an action is stated, each person, each department has to think out loud, has to talk and say, this is how this affects me and my department, and this is what we're going to do because of it. Everybody else in the circle weighs in and says, have you thought about this? So the meeting gets deeper, the meeting is very meaningful, but everybody is engaging in the work with each other. It's been very powerful. I've just started kind of using that with people. What it prevents against is what you just said. People walking out going, I get it, but what am I supposed to do? How does this affect me? And people saying things like, that was a waste of time. Or people having cooler conversations saying, you know what? I could tell them that's not going to work. Or I could have told them that wasn't going to work. Individually and collectively responsible. And when we leave that meeting, we're all going to know that we know what to do next. Yeah.
How about if you were to say, and as we think about going forward into school year 20, what is one thing you think school transportation will need to do differently by 2026?
Well, definitely instituting Senate Bill 88. I think that's thing one. Thing two is recognizing that there is an increase in the population that needs to be transported differently. Thing two. And, I'd say thing three, getting heavily involved with upper leadership, having more of a presence in upper leadership meetings to break down those silos and get the support that they need. And then finally, looking at what processes and procedures they have in place now. Right now, who is driving those students that we're talking about? Do they fit Senate Bill 88? Who are your vendors? Do you have those vendor attestation forms? Do you have an LEA checklist? Do you have all of that? If not, know what you're going to do about it and quickly.
That's great and very helpful. How about what is one thing that gives you hope about the direction school systems are heading?
Oh my gosh, I've been in leadership for a really, really long time, and leadership today is not what it was way back when I was in business school. It's not that at all. And I think the biggest change that I saw was in 2020 when everything went virtual. I saw a huge shift in the notion of self-care. I saw a huge shift in the notion of inclusive leadership, which I believe in wholeheartedly. Things that we know work became ever more present, and they're more talked about and more accepted now. So I guess one thing that I would say is my hope for leadership moving forward is that we are recognizing that leadership is about humans and it's about people. And if we don't take care of the people, the work doesn't get done. It's a people first, work second business. Anytime you have people, and public education is definitely that.
LaFaye, can you talk a little bit more about the opportunity resilience presents at a moment where there is so much change in transportation systems.
Absolutely. Resilience is so important, and we all have to have it, but there are times when we don't feel resilient. So I would say definitely work on resilience. It is a skill that can be learned. It can be taught. There's several resources out there that if you don't feel resilient and strong, that you can tap into to build more. Because when leaders don't feel resilient and don't feel their power, it's impossible for them to spread that resilience and that power to the people who follow them. And it doesn't mean that you're highlighting and faking about what's going on in your life. It means that you recognize that life is hard, adulting is hard, and all of those things, but you know you have the self-efficacy to know that you've gotten this far and that you can use the same skills that you have used to solve every other adult problem to solve the problems in leadership, including in this change initiative. So definitely be that resilient, strong person for the people who need you. Second thing I would say is reach out for help when you need it. In public education, you are not expected to be experts on everything. That's why you have consultants. That's why you have other people who are out there who know more about different things than you do. And even if you know everything about a topic, you have a full-time job. So reach out for help when you need it. And also, EverDriven is a great resource on Senate Bill 88. I'd say they're experts in the area. Reach out to them if you have some of those questions that we're talking about. Every skill that you have, there's a lady named Neela Connors who wrote a book for site administrators called If You Don't Feed the Teachers, They Eat the Students. So I'll say to leaders that if you are not strong and you don't have within you to feed into the people who do the work and work for you, it's going to show up in your organization some way. So get strong so that you can be strong for others.
LaFaye, thank you for your time and perspective. We hope everybody has found this session useful, and I look forward to connecting again.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.